back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and we're going to continue our discussion with Kim Fortner and Paul Forsey, local historians from Trigg County. So after, say, Civil War-ish, the Civil War, a lot of that stuff happened. But, I mean, everything's all hunky-dory, right? Nobody has any problems after the Civil War, and everybody's holding hands and agrees to move forward, right?
Until we had a little disagreement over how much we ought to sell our tobacco for.
Oh, yes. All right. Yeah, let's get...
Do we cover the Night Riders?
Yes, this is one of the rabbit holes I've went down since I've started this podcast. This is the old Night Riders. What do you got?
We had them. It's a hotbed, shall we say?
Yes. Well, Canton comes up. Quite a bit in Canton, Princeton, Hopkinsville. Like all those places are big names when it comes to Night Riders.
That's right. And I suppose those teenage boys that had, the war was over and had nothing else to do, so they decided to put on a bed sheet and ride their horses around in the middle of the night, creating confusion.
Uh-huh. Now, there's one, you bring up the bed sheets. There's one picture that I see all the time, and it looks hilarious. They really do. But they got the holes cut out of the eyes. They got the it's all. Is there any other more pictures besides just those? Or that
I'm
one?
Sure there are, yes. And I know that the Christian County Museum has actual garments from the Night Riders. And they look just exactly like those pictures. They're very crude, and they're very. It would be scary enough to encounter them in the night. And I'm sure you've covered this before, but the whole idea with the Night Riders was there was a monopoly on the tobacco prices, and the farmers got together and said, we're just not going to sell our tobacco, and we'll force the price to go up, and some people couldn't afford to hold out and would sell there. And so then the Night Riders would go take vengeance on them. And but then the Night Riders did things. They raided Hopkinsville, and that was a big raid that was orchestrated across 2 or 3 counties. Trigg County and Caldwell County played enormous parts in that raid, and dynamited and burned several tobacco warehouses. And then on the retreat after the carnage, the posse from Hopkinsville fired into the rear guard buggies of the retreating Night Riders, and one individual was killed. And I think that may be the only individual that was killed in that way with the Night Riders, but that was here in Trigg County, and his name was George Ed Gray. He was 19 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I interviewed his family, and so of course the state militia were in the county, and so they were searching, trying to find what was going on and who was doing what. And when he died, the militia came to his house, and the family hid his body behind the cook stove in the kitchen.
Whoa.
And then after the militia left, they held a funeral in the cemetery, which was just next door to their house, in the middle of the night.
Wow. See, that's the thing with the Night Riders. There is so many little stories out there about things similar, or just like that. It seems like just a wild time during the state's history, and of course Tennessee had it going on as well.
Sure. Yeah, it was quite a. It was a nightly event somewhere. There was something going on. So yes, the Trigg County was in the middle of that. Of course, tobacco has always been a cash crop for our farmers locally, and still today is. It's a big crop in Trigg County.
Did they ever have any raids or you have whenever I was doing a lot of the reading, there was a big raid in Hopkinsville where they kind of surrounded and took over the town.
Sure.
Anything like that in, say, Cadiz or Canton or anything like that, where they just pretty much strong-armed the locals.
They mostly were just terrorizing the local tobacco farmers individually. Yeah.
Well, they did burn, depots. One night they burned 3 train depots, one of them being at Cerulean. There was a warehouse burning at Golden Pond. So yes, there was a good deal of that raid type behavior, but predominantly they went after individuals who were not participating in the boycott.
Sometimes in their haste, though, they messed up. They had one raid at Rock Castle, which was also, of course, on the river, and there was a lot of tobacco waiting there to be shipped out, and so they rolled several of the hogshead into the river, and then later discovered that about half of them belonged to one of their own members.
Oh, well, they got they put the hog too far ahead, I guess. They were thinking.
A little too hasty there.
Yeah. Oh, sorry for their luck, I guess.
But the community did seem to settle into their life after the Civil War. I don't know that there wasn't any bitter feuds or anything like that. An interesting thing, I can't remember, was it Abraham Lincoln's second election? His first election. Abraham Lincoln's first election, he got 1 vote in Trigg County.
Well, that's one.
And the man who cast the vote bragged about it, I think, for the rest of his life.
Well, did he vote? I assume he voted the second time, right? So did his poll numbers improve the second go round? Well, that's funny though. So I think it was in Elizabethtown. There's quite a few, ironically enough, counties in Kentucky that like hardly anybody voted for Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it was so low. Like it was like you said, 1 or like 2 or 3, 5. It was very low.
Yeah.
But well, one person voted for him. So
that's not an industry that we've kind of left out of the discussion is the ham industry. Trigg County is notorious for country hams. And even today we have a Country Ham Festival. But I don't really know when the ham industry became flourishing. I would say that it probably hit its peak when the train came into the county because it made it easy to ship hams out every day. But farmers would cure hams, and then there were stores in town that would buy them. And so it was cash, and you would take your hams to basically a grocery store, and then they would ship them out, and they would ship them out by the thousands. And they shipped worldwide. And so to cure ham, the way that it has always been done here, there are very few places that the climate is right, to make the hog killing successful.
Yeah.
And this climate here is, as is like Springfield, Virginia. That's a rival community with curing country hams. But for visitors who come to Cada's, which we have quite a few tourists because of the lakes, they are amused by the concrete pigs that we have up on Main Street that the artists have painted. Because it's all because of the ham industry.
Well, that's pretty good. They got horses all around Lexington, so might as well. So when you brought up the train being kind of big for that industry, what year did the train come in?
1902 is when it first ran. We've been
And
trying to get the train here for some time because everyone was aware that the communities around them that had trains they were all flourishing because of all of the exports, imports, transportation, everything.
Mhm.
It's so much better around Trigg County, but
Yeah.
we finally got it in 1902.
And I think we had the shortest licensed train in the United States.
Yeah.
It
How
was
short was it?
like 10 or 12 miles.
10, I think it's 10.3
Oh, wow.
or something.
10
Yeah.
miles.
Yeah.
It's terribly crooked. And the joke always was that they built it crooked so that it would be long enough to get a license, but that's not really true. They built it curvy so that they didn't have to do so much excavating.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
was cheaper to buy the land and go around the hills than it was to cut through them.
Hmm.
And so it's not technically 10 miles from point A to point B because it's not a straight line. So yes, the train it flourished. It did really well until the interstate highway system came along in the 1950s, 1960s, and it began to decline.
But how many stops did it make in the county? I mean, was Cadiz the only one, or did it hit some other places?
No, it probably had four maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
It went from Cadiz to Gracie, and then there was a couple of 3 different lines that passed through Gracie. So you could go take the train to Gracie, and then once you get that, which is on the county border with Christian County, and then you could go anywhere you wanted to from that point. You could go south, north, and go to Hopkinsville or Clarksville or Princeton.
Yeah. Wow. And you said it kind of, not by the 1960s was when it kind of started dying down. When do you know when was the last train ride? I guess
1988, but
so
there was
the train ceased passenger service and freight service several years earlier, maybe back in the 60s or early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a factory, Johnson Controls made automotive seats, and they bought the train.
Okay.
And they operated the train up until
1988,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you talk about the lakes. When did the lakes get formed there?
Kentucky Lake is the westernmost boundary of Trigg County, which is the Tennessee River.
Mhm.
And it was formed in 1945-ish. And with when they constructed the Kentucky Dam.
Mhm.
And then 1962-ish, they impounded Lake Barkley with the Barkley Dam.
Mhm.
And then that brings up a whole nother issue with the impoundment of the lakes. And we've already talked about Fort Campbell being acquired by the federal government.
Mhm.
Then the federal government acquired all of the territory between the two rivers, between the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River, which is known today as Land Between the Lakes. It's a national forest. And then the interstate highways that pass through the county, 40% of the county has been acquired by the federal government.
Wow.
No, it's a state park there. We have a pretty good sized state park as well. So 40% of the land of Trigg County was confiscated by the government. And
That's a lot.
And I have to say that I think in my understanding, when the land was purchased for Fort Campbell, that people didn't necessarily want to give up their property, but they did it for a national purpose. It was to form an army base. But when the federal government decided to acquire the land between the rivers, that was quite to this day, there is a very bitter taste.
Yeah.
It was. There are no sides to this fight. the federal government is one side and everybody else is the other side.
So that's-
Yeah. It was not a fair acquisition, and shenanigans, as we say. I mean, there were stories of people who did not want to leave their homes, and if they left to go to the grocery store, when they came back, the government would have taken a bulldozer and pushed their home down.
Oh man! Whoa, that is that is.
So there was nothing fair about it, and I know. I would say everyone that I know that has roots in the Between the Rivers area, 3 generations later, are still just as bitter as if it had happened yesterday.
Wow. Well, I mean, I can understand why. I mean, that's pretty aggressive.
It is. Yeah.
Currently, though, I mean, a lot of tourists and stuff. The lake and stuff brings in most of
yeah.
of that.
Well, yeah, there's quite a bit of tourism here, and it's all because of the lakes and all because of the land between the lakes, which is a national forest. And it's a great hunting preserve, and known nationally. We have people who enjoy the outdoors, who camp and hunt, hike, boat, from all over the United States come, and so it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. It's we do have quite a bit of a tourist industry. I think the tourism in between the rivers is probably, it may just be second to Mammoth Cave. I think we have about 2 million visitors a year.
Wow. Which, I mean, those lakes they're huge. I mean, they're quite large.
Yeah.
You know, in Lincoln, we got Lake Cumberland's pretty close, but you know, it's not. I don't think it's even close to the size of the ones out in the west. So let's talk about people getting upset about things, schools and consolidation. How was that in Trigg County?
You talking about integration?
Yeah. What I'm just saying, like, you know, as far as a bunch, you typically in most counties you have a bunch of small one-room schools and so forth, and then eventually they become elementary schools and high schools, and then all the high schools become one county school,
right?
And everybody's always happy about it, and no one causes a fuss.
They consolidated gradually here, and all of the schools are on one campus in Trigg County. There are no.
Oh wow.
From kindergarten all the way through 12th grade are on the same campus.
Okay.
And it makes a very interesting situation. I remember it just happens to be that there's a great deal of, well, it may not be now, but when I was in school, there was a lot of interaction between students, say elementary students and high school students. We would get credit for taking our break time and go down to the elementary school and help them with their reading or read to them, or help them with their math. High school students would do that. I don't know if they do that now or not.
But I mean, Trigg County was just like the others, as you say, about we had a lot of small schools scattered around the county, and I had about 4 or 5 high schools in Trigg County, and one being in Katie's, the Katie's High School. And then some of the powers that be decided, that we needed to consolidate the high schools and formed Trigg County High School, which opened in the fall of 1937. And it and the Katie's High School overlapped for 1 year. And then Katie's High closed. And the way they did, like they pulled 1 or 2 grades from each of the other high schools and just slowly brought the other students in from around the county before they completely closed the other high schools.
What year was it that, or do you know right off when the Trigg County High School was 100% its own?
By about 19, probably within 2 or 3 years, I think.
Didn't Mount Pleasant School close in 53?
What do you mean, just for high school students?
Or all the students?
Yeah.
All the students.
Yeah, I guess when
the high schools were all consolidated within about 3 years or so, I think. And then the last grade school, I think, closed in the 60s, I think.
Oh wow,
Because there was
wow.
still, yeah.
So that's been
Not
a
really,
while then.
early
Yeah.
60s, but
And then there was integration, and of course, there was MacUpton, which was an African American school, and it was a grade school, and the African American high school students went to Christian County to Attucks High School.
Okay.
And then consolidation,
it was
integration
in
was
1962,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
And so then that was when that school, it didn't technically close, because when they consolidated the African American schools and the white schools, there wasn't enough room. And so they used the MacUpton school building as the 3rd and 4th grade consolidated, integrated.
And in the mix of that small period of time, the Trigg County High School burned in the summer of 1960. So the school system was dealing with trying to find room for everybody, build a new building, and then integrating everybody within a span of about 3 years.
Yeah.
There.
That's that can be quite a bit of a task there.
Yeah.
So has there been a new? Obviously, they built one then. Is the high school the same? Or is there a new high school now? Even since that one was built in the 60s.
The high school is still the same building they built in 61 or 62. They built new elementary schools and middle schools, and then the elementary school divided into primary and
intermediate.
Kindergarten or intermediate, yeah.
Yes, and so
they've renovated the buildings a lot, but the high school building is still the same.
I don't know how many acres the school sits on, but it sits in town, all on one campus.
That's pretty impressive that they kind of already started forming the high school that early as far as the county school. A lot of the county schools didn't pop up until about the 50s and 60s and so forth. I think Rockcastle's the high school didn't start until the mid 60s. I could be wrong on that, but it's about that time frame. But yeah, we still have a few. Like we had a school close about 2 years ago in Lincoln County, an elementary school that they had to consolidate.
Right.
People were not happy about it.
Yeah, I think they're experiencing that somewhat in Christian County. I think Christian County is even consolidating their 2 high schools. I don't think anybody's happy about that. But there was no issue here as far as I know. I think everyone was reasonably excited because the little high schools were so small, and it was just a difficult situation to try to maintain that many high schools.
Mm-hmm.
One issue that they did have, and they figured out how to deal with it, but was transportation, because we had all of these students that lived over between the rivers, and there were no bridges at that point. And so they had to transport students by ferry across the Cumberland River to get them into into school for a few years until the first bridge was built.
Wow. Yeah, that would be a different way of getting to school. Is, hey, we got to get to the ferry, or we are not making it. Let's talk about. Well, you all probably might know as far as like famous people from Trigg County. Lynn Boyd is the one that I was able to pull out, and mainly because I was researching counties that are people that have counties named after them, and Lynn Boyd has a county named after him. Anybody else that you all is worth mentioning? I mean, of course, there's always those local heroes that people have, but
well, yes and no. Because Kim and I, we specialize on digging up dead people.
As morbid as that sounds,
we just love their stories, and yes, they're people that are somewhat obscure. There are people who were reasonably famous in their day, but people don't know about them today. That's an interesting thing. There was an opera singer from Trigg County whose name was Ricardo Martin. And in 1900, 1907, up until about 1914, he was he performed at the Met with Enrico Caruso and was very, very well known. You mention his name today, and no one has a clue who he is. But he was like a rock star back then. Every newspaper in the country carried stories about him constantly, and all of his marriages and and sordid affairs. We claim Boots Randolph. He wasn't actually born here, but his parents were from here, and he lived here many years. But the local golf course is named after Boots Randolph. Who else do you think?
Want to talk about Silas Terry?
Oh, sure. Silas Terry was an admiral in the United States Navy. He was going to the Naval Academy, and the Civil War broke out. And all of his family became Southern sympathizers, but because he was going to the U.S. Naval Academy, they said, hey guys, you're all now in the Union military. And he became an admiral in the United States Navy. His daughter married the Italian ambassador to the United States, and he was instrumental in World War II in convincing the Italian government to switch sides to the Allies.
Oh.
And Silas had brothers who fought for the Confederacy. And story goes that when he came home to visit, one brother in particular made sure he was not around because they did not speak.
Oh.
After the war.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a story. Yeah.
That well, that's
So it was a classic case brother fighting brother, because at Vicksburg, I think Silas Terry was in charge of a vessel that fired upon Vicksburg, and the Ben Dyer, his brother, was an infantryman there at Vicksburg.
Wow.
So he was fired upon by his brother.
Wow, that is pretty wild.
They both survived the war.
They both died in the war or survived the war?
No, they both survived.
Okay.
They survived.
That would be an odd dinner conversation, you know. I was blasting away on yeah.
A little awkward.
Yeah.
A little awkward.
Newspaper, as far as that goes, what was the local newspaper, or is it still going?
The Katie's Record is still in existence. It started in about 1881, the business did, and they first started publishing in January of 1882. At the time, it was titled the Kentucky Telephone, and then the name changed in the 1890s, I believe, to the Katie's Record, but it is still in existence. There were some other newspapers before that lasted maybe a year or two.
There's also a situation with an African American newspaper here.
Okay.
The Cato's Informer. It was in publication up until about 1932-ish, and circulation of 10,000. It was published by a man named Dr. Wendell McRidley, and it was African American owned, and he wrote and had published articles from St. Louis to New York to Atlanta, just all over the South, and had an office on Main Street, Cato's.
That's pretty interesting because you don't really see as many of those, in Kentucky at all, as far as an African American newspaper.
He was an interesting fellow because he had a school. He had a normal and theological school, college. And his school's intention was to teach African American teachers and preachers. He felt like that they needed to be educated. And he and his wife had this school, and they had like 140 something students for many years. It had a dormitory, and there were quite a few graduates of that school that did several important things. I think there was a bank started in Nashville by one of his graduates, and maybe a publisher in another place with one of his students. But he was a big proponent of education, and started a number of elementary schools, grade schools for African American students in the county. There were 19 African American schools. I think, isn't that right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's right. 19. And he probably started the most of them. He did not start all of them, but he started most of them.
That's pretty impressive. And the value of education is was one thing Kentucky lacked in many ways up until probably the first 30, 40 years of the state. But somebody's out there pushing it then, and having a newspaper and all that really lends to their character, I guess, and so forth.
I need to correct something that I said a few minutes ago. I realized I misspoke. When the students were bused across the river on ferry some of the time, but there was already a bridge in existence. I misspoke on that. I realized after I said that bridge was already built. But there were instances at various times that they had to be bussed across on the ferry. So I need to correct that.
Well, that kind of covers quite a bit of Trigg County's history, a little bit of Cadiz and Canton and Night Riders and all those other things all thrown in there as well. Is there anything else you all want to bring up before we go?
Of course, we have this book that we would like for your followers to be aware of, that we put out through the bicentennial in 2020. So if they're interested in county history and Trigg County history in particular, then there's a story for every day, and it's pretty comprehensive for the history of the county.
And now it also is an award-winning project. Is that the correct term, you think?
Yes, we won an award for special projects from the Kentucky Historical Society this year.
A very good collection of history. I would encourage everybody to get it. If you want to get it, you can find the Trigg County Bicentennial, correct? Facebook page?
Yes.
And you can reach out to there if you want a copy and so forth. Well, that is all I have. If there's nothing else, you guys, thank you all for coming on and sharing about Trigg County history and all the good stories and so forth. We will definitely have to do it again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having us on.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.